Hi guys, welcome back. So we have another interview today, and I have the lovely Homebrew Witch here with me today to talk about all things political and tarot. Welcome.
Hi, lovely to be here. Thank you for asking me.
And so if you just like to introduce yourself for anybody that doesn't know who you are and what you do, I will hand, it's always the best bit. It's like when someone's like, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Nancy. I'm also known as the Homebrew Witch, and I'm a professional tarot reader and witch. So yeah, really excited to be here.
And also I will pop all of her links down below on the video, so if you want to check out more you can straight away. There's a main page and then the Instagram, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those two. Okay, so the subject you picked today is politics and tarot, and you were just telling me a little bit before we started recording. Would you like just to tell everyone else that little bit? Because I thought that was
Yeah.
really great and a great place to start. So
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I really care about politics. Like, my degree is actually in political science, and I think it's something that has a massive impact on all of our lives. And I think when we talk about politics, I'm not just speaking about, governments and voting and things like that and what people typically associate with politics, but also politics in its broader sense, which is relating to power and structures. So that's, encompassing essentially everything. That's things like, kind of why you shop in the places you shop, and, your choice to participate in the economy is a political choice. Capitalism is a political issue. Also things like, white supremacy, that's politics as well. And I think that, these things have such a big impact on our lives, and it's kind of a shame that they're often left out of spirituality, because what's going to have a bigger impact on someone's ability to find a job than like a global financial crisis? And missing that out with guidance and conversations around spirituality just means that you don't really get everything you need to get from a conversation or a reading. So I'm always super passionate about kind of making people bring that awareness into their spirituality and their practice, because I think it just really helps you understand things a lot more deeply, and to kind of better serve people in the 21st century, instead of offering guidance that doesn't really apply to people anymore.
so do you feel that when somebody is learning tarot, or when somebody is coming for a reading, what they might sort of dive into, they might get very excited about what they're learning, but perhaps there is like a disconnect from the real world? Because we talked a little bit about spiritual bypassing, and I will dive into that in a minute, because it's fascinating. But I was just, how do you think someone then bridges that gap? Because that it's quite easy to lose sight of the everyday mundane, because a lot of people turn to tarot because it feels mystical or other or magical, and whilst they do want help in their life, they might be seeking a more magical answer rather than like the mundane things that they can do. So how do you start to bridge that gap between what someone's expecting from tarot and what would actually be helpful to somebody?
Yeah, so I think kind of from a learning perspective, someone that's totally new to tarot, I think the best place to start is to kind of just start thinking about where tarot comes from, and start thinking about, go back to the basics a little bit, and think a little bit about the context in which tarot was created. So, it was created in Italy, like, over 500 years ago. Like, what was going on there then? And there was all this stuff that was happening where we had, like, people were starting to go off to, discover, in inverted commas, America. And that was a massive thing. You also had people that kind of, lots of intellectuals that were coming over from Constantinople after the fall of that empire. So there's loads of stuff going on. And actually, when you look at tarot, you often see like things like kind of messages in some of the cards in the original archetypes about some of those things that were happening in the context it was created. And I think kind of, thinking about what the world was like back then, that if you think about how much it's changed since then, some of those archetypes kind of need a little bit of an update. So I think that's just firstly a really great place to start, is just kind of think about, how much it's changed. And also kind of just a reminder that, magic and spirituality has always been contextual. It's always been, existing in a particular context, and there's nothing, unmagical or, not spiritual about kind of updating it. And just kind of, take that time to look into that disconnect between, when tarot was created and why it's being used for now. I think then also kind of to actually start looking at the cards and sort of what they represent, and just trying to critically engage with them a little bit more is another great place to start. Because I think, you know, for instance, you know, often we see the Lovers card, and like in a lot of decks that's depicted as a heterosexual couple. So, you know, why is that the case? You know, why do we see like, you know, less queer representation traditionally, although obviously there's a lot of, you know, decks that are kind of improving that now, and things like that, and just trying to like, you know, critically engage with that a little bit more. And also kind of thinking about how you read for people, which is something that obviously people are a little bit more experienced will be thinking about. I think that kind of, obviously people do turn to tarot because it's magical, it's mystical, and you know, sometimes you just want guidance that's feels like that, like it's just a nice thing to kind of engage with. And I think it's really important to kind of, you know, remember though why you're using tarot and like what you're coming to your deck with, because, you know, if you're coming for guidance, you need to be coming for guidance, right? And you need to be able to like say, you know, I need to know what I need to do with this situation. I need to know like all of the details, all the ugly truth as it is. Sometimes you just want to kind of, you know, get some kind of, you know, more obscure message, and that's fine as well. But I think that you need to like be aware of what you're coming to tarot for. And I think a lot of the time it is for guidance. And when that's the case, you need to be able to kind of say like, okay, I need to understand what's going on more broadly in the world and the impact that's having on me as well.
It's a good year for it, I think, because 2020 has been a bit of a disaster in many ways, but I think it has definitely centered a lot of us to realizing just how political our daily lives even are, and the impact that we can have, and the impact. I was talking to my friend today because we went to find this new shop that he has a shop before, and he's opened up a new one, and it's all eco-friendly, and it's serve your own stuff and refills and good for the environment, biodegradable. And I was like kid in a candy shop in there. I was like, oh, look at all the things we can do that are good for the environment. And I feel like a lot of people hear politics and they sort of switch off. And I don't think they realize that it can be day-to-day activities. It can be just becoming slightly more aware of the things that you're doing in your life. Do you have any advice for people who are very like almost turned off by the idea that their magic is political? Because you do get these people who are like, I don't want to hear about politics in witchcraft, and presumably it's the same in tarot as well. And how do you get people sort of over the hurdle of that, or how would you advise them if they were very not like confrontational, because then there'd be no point, but like if they were a little bit resistant to that process, how would you advise them past it?
So I think one of the things that I kind of always say, because I know this is a really big problem, and you know, and I do get why, because, you know, when you look at our government, it's like, it's a fucking nightmare. Like, like, you know, it's not something that you just think, oh God, like not this again. And so I totally understand why some people just want to switch off. But actually, you know, that's not gonna help you. If you really want to, you know, be spiritual, you need to kind of engage with all of those things that are going on around you. I think feel the connection that you have to everything, not just, you know, the good stuff. The thing that I kind of always say to people when they're really resistant to that connection between themselves and the world they live in is to kind of, you know, recognize the fact that spirituality and magic has always been political. Like politics is about, you know, your relationship to power, and, you know, the power structures that operate in your life, and, you know, what you believe and what you think is a massive product or response to that. Like there's so many like really massively clear examples of this. So if you think about, you know, for better or worse, you know, Christianity was kind of the religion of people that were like rebelling against the Roman Empire. Like Jesus was kind of, you know, literally throwing over tables of the religious authorities in like where he was in Jerusalem, and, you know, literally, you know, sticking it up to the Roman occupation. And that started like a massive religion, and that all came from, like, you know, a lot of that came from or was massively related to like Jesus's politics. If we look at kind of, you know, witchcraft, that's also been, you know, throughout history, accusations of witchcraft have been leveled against, you know, largely women who have been seen as, you know, outsiders who no longer serve society. So it's people, you know, getting rid of them. That's political. That's like people using their power to get rid of a person. If we look at kind of, you know, like practices like Santeria as well, like that's something that's kind of, you know, evolved out of a need to kind of, you know, retain that connection to previous spiritual practices in the face of colonization. So, you know, altering the names of the worship to include saints and things like that to make it palatable to the colonizing forces, which is, you know, birthed this like really beautiful practice out of it that was kind of, you know, created from that necessity. If you look at like, you know, the English Civil War as well, like you had people that were called like diggers, and that was like, you know, it was actually like at its heart a religious conflict, the English Civil War, in a lot of ways. And, you know, but that was that massive, you know, mishmash between politics and religion and who's allowed to practice what and why and that kind of thing. And there's just so many examples of that throughout history. And even when it hasn't come to a war, it hasn't been to do with colonization, it's still like what you think about what's out there is really political and says a lot about kind of your relationship to power structures, even without you realizing it. So kind of even if you want to say like, you know, I don't want to get involved in politics, that in itself is kind of a political choice, because you're saying that like you have the privilege to detach from that situation, you have the ability to do so, and I guess as well, like it's showing that you're kind of done with it, and you're like, you know, almost like pushing away from power structures, or, you know, refusing to acknowledge them. It's still political, so why not kind of, you know, just be a little bit more open with everything and just kind of say like, you know, politics and governments and stuff like that can be crap, but I need to be aware of that at the very least, even if I don't want to like, you know, constantly bring it into my practice. I still need to have that awareness. So I think just kind of reminding people that, you know, throughout history this has always been political, and, you know, it's still the case today, and, you know, no matter how much you want to bury your head in the sand isn't going to change that, basically.
I think there's something really wonderful in embracing both the sovereignty power aspect that you discussed and the sort of rebellious element of it. And so if we come to witchcraft or we come to tarot and we enjoy that rebellious spark that kind of comes with it quite a lot of the time, because for a lot of people it's, I'm going to engage with this mystical, magical spirituality, and there is a little bit of rebellion either against a previous religion that they grew up with or the status quo, and that little bit of that fire of rebellion drives them to investigate these areas. And so it's like, why can't that then carry over a little bit into the idea of the political? Because if you be rebellious within the face of politics, then you are being political, as you said. And I think for a lot of people, they see politics and they see the status quo in the West, which is fuddy old men, white men, with a very rich entitlement, who seem disconnected from the general populace in a lot of countries. And it's sort of, it leads to these feelings of like disconnect, because nothing about that connects to the sense of self, because it is so far removed for most people that it just feels like I can't get involved with it. Almost not even that people don't want to get involved with it, almost like they can't, because it is so disconnected. And I feel like it might be set up that way on purpose to encourage apathy in people, because if people, you know, if people really rebelled, if people really rose up, they're the minority.
There always comes the point in history where they start to realize who's boss. It does end up happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Repeated in history many times over. We need more rebellions. Like Tudor kings were terrified of rebellion. Let's do that again.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like it's so true what you're saying, like about like witchcraft in particular, because, you know, I've definitely, for me, a large part of that was a kind of what attracted me to it persistently, at least, was kind of that rebelliousness of it as well. And I think, you know, people that are involved in witchcraft, like if you take on the title of witch, you're taking on that title that has been used to kind of oppress people like the world over for hundreds and hundreds of years, well, in some cases thousands of years. And, you know, I think you need to really be aware of that history. And actually you can still see that today. Like there's normally a massive link between like waves in feminism and, you know, a big kind of, you know, leap in interest in witchcraft as well. Like kind of, you know, there's been a big upsurge in it, you know, fairly recently, and that's been kind of really linked to the latest wave of feminism that's kind of around. It's why you see, like, you know, more people engaging with things in slightly different ways, whereas you kind of, when you had like second wave feminism, which was more, you know, like bodily focused and kind of focusing on the female body, is why you kind of get that's reflected in a lot of witchcraft beliefs of people that kind of joined at that time and things like that. So there's definitely like a big link there that people should be aware of if they're practicing.
I was just muting for a second then. We had a really loud aircraft go over. I was like, I've not heard an aircraft all year, and then you start recording. Yeah, so feminism is an interesting topic because, again, it's another one that a lot of people like away from, because they again have this propagated idea of what it is. And I've seen so many women, even within spiritual circles, tarot circles, witchcraft circles, and they sort of like, oh, I'm a human, I don't want any of that, I'd rather look at humanitarian values. And it's like, okay, but it's not all about you. You might feel that you're okay, but there are plenty of women in the world who are not. Even within the West, like it's not all equal playing field. And I feel like if we do come to these areas where we're looking at connection, which is what's underneath a lot of it for me, I call it the spiritual ecosystem, the way that we are connected to everybody else and the spirits of the world and the spirits of nature. If we're looking at ourselves as part of this connection, then we can't really ignore the people whose lives are made harder than our own. I think that was very, very present with the Black Lives Matter movement, and there was a statement going around that if you identify as witch and you turn your back on the people who are being subjugated, then you have no right to the title. And that was really interesting to me, and because you did mention, you know, the subjugation of mainly women, not completely women, but mostly women, under the title of witch through history. Then you were looking at women who were repressed for being female, having money, being widowers, having land, being separate, being outside of society, and were therefore a threat. And so that's happening again when people are looking at Black Lives Matter. And I was interested to know, because I've heard recently there's been a few I don't know what you call it, there's been large sort of, well, I guess drama around sort of the creation of tarot decks which are insensitive to other people, and that's kind of that political issue within tarot as well. So how do you feel about that sort of thing? Where do you sort of land between freedom of creation and art and expression versus almost being politically blind, the way that some people create decks, and it's like they're almost disconnected from the politics underneath when it comes to their imagery and tarot?
Yeah, so I mean, decks are a great place to start, and a great place to kind of start, you know, trying to think about inclusion is to buy it from a creator that's kind of, you know, buy from a queer creator or buy from a Black creator. Buy from someone that kind of, you know, the point of their work is often, you know, to highlight their own lived experiences in the deck. So that's kind of a really great place to start. And I often, like, I love buying those kinds of decks. Like, oh God, I'm just looking at how many I've got here. Like, I've got a few. So, like, and I think that's a really great place to start as well. If you're sort of, you know, thinking, you know, I do want to kind of incorporate this into my tarot practice, and I don't really know where to begin. That's a brilliant place to start. And you're like supporting creators, you're often supporting small businesses, and, you know, Brill. And, you know, I do, there have been some decks that I think have been, like, you know, really insensitive. There was one that was on Kickstarter actually fairly recently that used like kind of imagery that was related to slavery in America, I believe. And, you know, obviously that's horrific. And like, regardless of the medium, that should not be kind of being done today. In terms of, like, you know, the freedom of the creator, you know, I recognize that I can't really stop people getting decks published a lot of the time, but I do have the ability to make them less successful by not purchasing them, which I think is like a really important thing, is to, you know, your ability to buy stuff is and, you know, your ability to kind of, you know, boycott stuff as well is a really great use of your political power. So that's kind of one of the things that I would say as well, is that kind of, you know, firstly, if you see a deck that is, you know, really bad in that way, like, you know, start, like, if it's on Kickstarter, like, you know, try and get it put down, like, try and get it taken off the website. You know, if it's a deck that's kind of, you know, being stocked in a shop that you find, like, you know, the imagery is really outdated and offensive, like, you know, you can write to the shop and say, like, you know, I think this is wrong and you shouldn't be stocking this, and I don't want to shop here if you're going to kind of stock this stuff, things like that. Like, try and, you know, prevent it from, you know, being like around people. And also just don't buy it. Like, you know, just use that power to just say, like, no, I'm not buying this. And, you know, try and put your money instead to, you know, decks that are more inclusive. Like, there are some fantastic decks that, you know, you can actually get quite cheaply as well, like things like the Modern Witch deck is super duper cheap now. You've also got like a deck that's just come just finished on Kickstarter actually, that but they'll also be available after Kickstarter, which is the oh god, what's it called, the Fyodor Pavlov tarot deck, which focuses on kind of, you know, queer and non-binary representation. You can buy that, and it's a beautiful deck. You can buy decks like that. There's also other decks as well, like the Afro Goddess deck. There's some brilliant ones that you can buy. I think just making sure that you're kind of supporting the right people and, you know, calling out the bullshit when you see it is the right thing to be doing.
I won't mention the name of that deck because I don't think it needs any more attention, but for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, there was a deck on Kickstarter recently which has caused a lot of controversy, created by a white female creator, and a lot of the images were really problematic on two levels. There was some racist imagery. There was a lynched man in the Hanged Man card, which is obviously massively inappropriate. And then I think the death card was problematic as well. And those two cards she originally was going to change. And then because people responded, because people were not happy about it, because people were uncomfortable with it. And then it turned out that one of the cards was Britney Spears when she shaved her head and was having a breakdown. And it was almost as if the creator was actually mocking mental health with this card and with a statement on Instagram that she created around it. So that deck has now been pulled from Kickstarter. I think she made the decision to end it, and there's been quite a little bit of conversation around whether this is right and reasonable or fair or not. And to be honest, when I think it's a really difficult situation when it comes to certain situations in art, because on the one hand, I don't want to censor art because that's a very dangerous road for us to get down. But on the other hand, cultural insensitivity cannot be defended by, oh, I'm an artist, because it's being used in such a way where it's almost like, you know, how like some comedians hit down by mocking people. It's almost the same vibe to it, where it's not supporting people who are struggling. It's a very strange choice, especially from like a female white creator, and especially when people are being lynched in America and nothing's being done about it. Like, it's a current event that people are dying, and it feels icky to be like trying to make money off it. There's something very like capitalist and insensitive and about it. So that's what's happening, if you guys don't know. And there's conversations about other things. I think sometimes people get a little bit more extreme, like some people are wanting to boycott the Wild Unknown because there are dream catchers in it. And I'm like, I think you're a bit late for the Wild Unknown to start with. And I'm like, there are more problematic decks and things that are happening. I think.
I actually, to be honest, I think I'm one of the few people on earth that doesn't use the Wild Unknown deck, so I've not actually seen the imagery. But yeah, that is interesting. And I think as well, like one of the other big ones that people talk about a lot is the Mother Peace deck, which again I don't use because. And it wasn't because I actually knew about this, to be fair. I found out about this fairly recently. The thing that as soon as I saw it was circular cards, I just thought, oh God. Because like, as a tarot reader, it's nothing that I hate more than those kind of cards. It's just so confusing. And like, you just get such grey messages where it's kind of like, what are you saying? So I, you know, all the circular decks I generally don't vibe with anyway, so I never bothered looking at it. And I learned really recently that even though that came out years ago, and it was made by, I think, 2 white women that thought that that incorporated a lot of like imagery from the continent of Africa without like any real research of it, and it was incredibly insensitive. And you know, they were profiting off of cultures they'd copied from but didn't understand, and they'd like, you know, really offended the people that they were copying from, basically, as well as just copying from them. And I think, you know, more and more people now are kind of saying no to that. So I do still think that even if a deck's been published, it's worth kind of being like, you know, this is wrong. And I think like with the Wild Unknown deck, that might be something as well, that like you can still like, you can say this is wrong and like still call it out. But again, I haven't actually looked at that deck, to be fair, like because I don't like the imagery of it.
That's controversial in and of itself. There you go.
It gives me a headache because it's so like all the lines and stuff like that. I don't like it. But yeah, I still think it's worth kind of saying this deck's got this and it's kind of problematic as well.
Yeah. Okay. So we're about at half an hour. So is there anything else you'd just like to include for everybody on the political, anything we haven't covered about the political energies of tarot that you would like to include?
Yeah, the one thing I do want to kind of just say is about, you know, the end point of all of this stuff, like a failure to kind of, you know, acknowledge politics in any way in your readings or in your practice leads to spiritual bypassing. And I think that that's kind of the really, that's the most damaging aspect of kind of, you know, doing this, where you kind of ignore politics and say, you know, I don't want to lower my vibration or whatever people say, because they don't want to get involved in it, is that, you know, you end up just totally spiritually bypassing and saying, you know, doing the whole love and light thing instead of actually, you know, being, you know, sympathizing with people and kind of offering support. And I think particularly if you're a tarot reader, that's something you desperately want to avoid. Like, you want to make the people you work with and read for feel really seen, and like you kind of, you know, understand them. And it's something that I've had personal experience with. Like, I came from a really working class background, and I've been really privileged for a number of reasons that I've been able to kind of, you know, go to university and do all this stuff that I know a lot of other people that kind of were in my financial position growing up weren't able to do. But I remember kind of, you know, like speaking to someone who was you know, a reader when I was younger, and they kind of, I was really stressed out about like my family's financial situation, and you know, it wasn't because we weren't working. Like, there was like everyone, like my mum worked like 7 days a week, like 2 or 3 jobs constantly, and was like, you know, just always trying to make money, and so that we could eat. And like I remember someone kind of saying to me, you know, what the problem is that none of you have a money mindset. And I've never wanted to like throw hands so hard in my life because it's just like a total disregard for the situation that kind of, you know, why people end up in that. It's because of like privilege, like a lack of access to opportunities, so many different reasons why people end up not being able to kind of, you know, go to university, get good jobs, succeed in the job market. Like, there's a whole range of reasons why that's the case. That's not the fault of the individual. And to then kind of just say to someone, you know, it is your fault, is just really infuriating and patronizing. And I think that kind of, you know, that's the main point of including politics and that political awareness in your readings and in your practice, is so that you don't do that, and you can actually support people and understand their problems and not give them horrifically bad and patronizing and offensive advice, is so that you can kind of say, you know, like, I recognize where you're at, and, you know, in some cases actually help them like find ways to kind of come to terms with that and work with what they've got. Because that's the thing, is that, like, you know, there are some things that it's just so fucking difficult to overcome, and like to kind of just be like, you've got bad money mindset, or you know, you're like, you're not thinking about this right, this is all on you. Totally ignores all the structures and systems that are really like stepping down on someone. And I think that's why we need to be talking about politics, is so that kind of we as practitioners, as witches, as readers, can kind of, you know, make sure that we're seeing and understanding the problems people coming to us are facing, and that we can give advice that's actually going to help them instead, and, you know, helps them feel seen as well by us, and not just, you know, like we're another person that doesn't get it, basically.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I think that, yeah, that was kind of what I really wanted to say. It was just that.
Yeah. You reminded me as well, because I was like, yes, we're going to talk about the spiritual bypassing, and then I was like, Oh yeah, we've made it to 30 minutes. No. So I'm going to include another example as well, because I think it's a really important point about the spiritual bypassing and how that is political. So for any women, and this has been part, well, it's not just women. Let's just say that right off the bat, but the focus tends to be women. So there has been a huge uprise in domestic violence because of COVID, because of lockdown. And spiritual bypassing has been occurring around this area with such an alarming rate recently that I'm fairly horrified by it. And this can come into tarot as well as other areas of spirituality. And I will tell you one thing that I saw that made me inhale breath at a rate of knots. So there was a woman who was putting out this idea that is it that I can't remember the exact wording. Is it your relationship is that terrible, or is it just the theater of your relationship? So it was the inference that you're enjoying this and creating this drama within your relationship.
Yeah.
And I was like, all I could think was the massive surge of people who are in a relationship that is domestically violent, that they're having difficulty getting away from. They've been conditioned that way. They've had their money taken away from them because of the creeping of control. And then people are like, well, spiritually speaking, maybe you just like the drama. And I was just like,
I was like, no, that's not how it works. Yeah, it's just that total, like, that's privilege, isn't it? When you're saying, like, actually, maybe it's your fault and you're doing this, and it's like, you clearly have had no fucking experience of this, if this is, like, how you're approaching it. And you just think, like, why on earth would you want to read with someone that, like, you know, unable to see the problems that you're facing in their entirety, and to kind of give such terrible advice and insight, which is why I just absolutely think there needs to be a better awareness. And there was a huge amount of it that I noticed as well around the Black Lives Matter movement. People were kind of, you know, doing spells to protect protesters, were doing, you know, hexes against you know, people in particular places that were massively causing harm, Trump being, you know, a classic one. And, you know, that I kind of like, I mean, we could talk for hours about my views on political magical action. I'm for it, basically, TLDR. But yeah, people were then kind of saying, you know, like, this is what you're doing is creating polarity, like, you're creating division. You're picking a side, and that's not your job as like a practitioner or a reader or a witch. And it just made me so angry, because I just kind of thought, yeah, I am picking a side, and that's the not racist side. It's just like, by default, if you're not picking a side, you're picking the racist side. Like, have you thought about that? Just,
well, the status quo is racist. The status quo is unfair and set against people. So yeah, by not choosing, you want to uphold the status quo, and that, no, you can't. Like,
yeah, exactly. And when people are saying, you know, like, oh, you know, all you're doing is creating polarity, that's what you need to avoid, I absolutely hate that, because I just think, you know, I do think that kind of, you know, most of the time, you know, the answer is never yes or no, it's somewhere in between. And I think, you know, there are some cases where you just need to say no. And like, you know, racism is one of them. Like, you know, if you've got, like, you know, police officers marching with jackboots down the street, so, you know, harm you know, black people in America, like,
shooting innocent
who
black
are
women
unarmed
in their beds. Oh
yeah, it's like, it's just, you know, what side it, like, is there a middle ground that you're comfortable with here? It's like, there shouldn't be. And I just think that that's, like, you know, that kind of language as well is really unhelpful, because I do think, you know, even if you think that, you know, things are very rarely, you know, yes or no, there's always an in-between, which I, you know, totally do. I always think that things are a lot more nuanced than we understand. I think, yeah, but, you know, there does come a point where you have to say, no, this is the side I'm on, I'm against that, and I'm with this. And I think that, you know, doing that is not, you know, doesn't make you any less magical. It doesn't make you any less, you know, good at being a reader, or any less good at being a witch, or anything like that. I think it just makes you like a human being with, like, a modicum of human decency. And I don't know why that's a particularly controversial opinion in the witchcraft community, but
I'm not entirely sure where. I mean, I know that a lot of people talk about not wanting to be polarizing within the magical community, and to a degree I understand that. But after a certain point, when you're arguing about a human being's right not to be shot in bed in their sleep for the police having the wrong house. Polarity is already there. You are already faced with pure polarity, and the only way to get to a place where it's not swung in the favor of police who are allowed to do these things is to stand against it. Like, the polarity already exists in that situation. It's already an us versus them situation, and there is no way to be neutral in that, because neutral is the same as saying these people deserve to die, which is not the case. Innocent people being shot in their beds or shot in the street, I can't, there's just no bone in me which is like, you can be neutral in that. No, you can't.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And it does terrify me that some people kind of in the witchcraft community think that that's an acceptable position, is to, you know, not stand against that. And it's just kind of, again, it's spiritual bypassing and just, you know, saying, oh, I prioritize my own ability to, you know, feel spiritual and magical over, you know, my ability, like, you know, your right to live, essentially. And my ability to recognize your right to live. So I just, I think that it's something that's a really massive problem in the magical community right now. I mean, it's one of many, you know, political problems, I think, in the magical community, including like cultural appropriation, which is also like a massive one, more prominent noticed for a really long time was just, you know, one that's clearly never experienced poverty telling you have a bad money mindset. It's not good, you know, there's just that total lack of awareness. So I think that it's really good that people are talking about it a lot more now, even if a lot of people are still think that, you know, it's acceptable, at least it's being spoken about. And I think that kind of tarot is a really good place to kind of, you know, start thinking about taking a long hard look at yourself, basically, about where you already, you know, practice spiritual bypassing, and where you can kind of start thinking a little bit more deeply about the situations people are in and the power structures that affect them.
Yeah, I think it's the undertone for me of all of it is kind of storytelling, and the stories of people and the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that we are gleaning from tarot and other mediums like it, because that's kind of what you're doing. You're interpreting sort of the story within the card and the story of the individual, and then it kind of meshes somewhere in the middle for me. And so when we are then forced, or not really forced, maybe forced in some cases, but encouraged to look at the stories of other people from other people's perception and other people's background and other people's experiences, it does open us up to an understanding which is more spiritual ultimately, because it's not just seeing things through our lens, through our story.
Absolutely.
Which is always worth doing, I think.
You need to kind of, you know, see the entirety of the story, and if you're not, you're just going to totally miss the point, misunderstand the picture, and give bad advice as well, if that's kind of what you're doing as well. It doesn't make sense to do that. It doesn't help you, it doesn't help the person that you're reading for. You need to kind of have that awareness to, you know, get that full picture and, you know, glean the full meaning of that card that you're reading and things like that. You need to be able to see it from, you know, a broader perspective than just the self as well, which is kind of like, I mean, I could go on a massive tangent about that, because that's kind of a relatively recent invention in philosophy as well. So it's definitely something that needs to be done, I think, in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. So we should probably wrap things up. We're a little bit over, but it's also interesting. So thank you. So thank you so much for coming and interviewing with me today. If you want to know more at home, guys, the links, as I said, are down below, so you can go and can they book a reading with you through your website? I'm assuming that's
you can. I think by the time you've like put this up, my books would have reopened. I closed them for a month so that to new clients, but they should be reopened, so people can book readings with me via the link that's for my website. And I'll also be opening up for the next cohort of my tarot course that I teach as well, fairly soon as well. So if anyone's interested in kind of learning about you know, learning tarot and a bit more deeply, and how to incorporate politics into it from the get-go, that's kind of quite a big part of the course, is me going on political rants, basically. So,
So there you go.
Yeah.
All that information will be down below, guys. Be sure to go check it out, and I will see you all very soon for more interviews. As always, if you would like me to interview anyone in particular, please let me know and I'll see if I can get a hold of them. If not, I'll keep going and bothering people at random. Many blessings, guys. Talk to you soon.